Learning. Our mission objectives today are to contextualize security as a practice, share lessons learned from common pitfalls, and establish a common framework. Basically, just kind of go through this process, distinguishing security as a practice and not a target, using a story. That story is based around StarCraft II, loosely. It's very embellished, and it's the story of me learning StarCraft II using security lessons. So, obligatory disclaimer. These are my thoughts, words, and views, and don't represent anyone I work with, my company, colleagues, anyone else. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Steven Legg. I'm a SecOps engineer. I do all these things. I'm at Zenmode on Twitter. I'm a developer on the PoshTech project, specifically with the host hardening and CIS benchmark utilities. So check out PoshTech. I know guys who just spoke also plugged it. It's really good, really great project. And then on the weekends, I'm a part-time mech pilot. Now I know what you're thinking. It looks really crappy, and the shop job's terrible, but don't worry, because I don't use Photoshop. I always use Paint for all my picture edits, because it's more hilarious when it looks really terrible. Notice that nowhere in any of these slides or my words does it say this. I'm not MLG Pro StarCraft II player. I'm not great at it. It's just all for theatrical effect and enjoyment. So we will not be looking at clicks per second, kill zones, optimizing attack paths, doing any John Maddening on any screenshots or anything like that. We will have some fun talking about relevant things. We'll throw in a little bit of humor. We're going to learn how to stay on top of security in practice and some very basic and easy to do things, regardless of your skill level, and laugh at my really poorly translated gaming analogies. Now keep in mind the tactics I'm talking about here are not exclusive. They're just simple, easy to do steps, and they can be picked up by anyone who might be responsible for the security of a network, whether they're operations, developer, security personnel. So when I first started learning StarCraft II, the first thing that I figured out I needed to do was learn a build order. It's really like a blueprint, a framework, or an overall guideline, but it doesn't really have everything you need to be successful. It's got like the basic stuff. You know what to build in what quantities. And then you realize you don't have everything you need just having that build order, which may lead you to make mistakes like this. For those of you that haven't played StarCraft or don't know, that's bad. So, using a build order, you can go through, you might understand some of the things to do, you might even make the right choices in certain places. But then something bad happens. And that something bad might look like this. It might look like this. You get the idea. But then you're all like, bro, when compliance standards are met, our governance overlords deem us unbreakable. And then a little bit of time goes on. And then you get a little bit more crazy. And you say, I'm not saying we were breached and didn't notice. But we were breached and didn't notice. And then you say, ancient vulnerabilities, bro. That's what got us. And despite all of that happening, you still do things a little bit off. You have a build order, you have a strategy, but it really doesn't give you what the spirit of those things are looking for. And even though you still get some of those things right, it's not going to protect you against a breach because, like compliance, a build order is an incomplete strategy. It doesn't tell you exactly where or how to apply everything. It gives you some general guidelines on how to do it. Compliance does not equal security, as I'm sure many of you know, but I love to highlight that. So, in short, don't be the little giblets or dust. Don't don't approach it that way. But the question that begs is, okay, so if I'm not doing it that way, if I'm not relying on compliance to tell me how to start or put together my security program, how can I? Well, in my career, the thing that I came upon when I was asking that question was the SANS 20 critical controls. Now, I'll show you the list of those controls here. We're not going to go into great detail about them, but what I'll say is that many of the things that we're going to talk about today will speak mostly to the controls found in item 3. If you can't read it, I don't know. Yeah, it's a little small. That's secure configurations and monitoring for configuration changes and other things like that. Long story short, basically, you don't want to be running your security program from your compliance standards thinking everything's good and then responding to incidents with token efforts that don't actually have an impact or help you in those critical moments. Really, what SANS did for me was help me make the right choices from the get-go. It kind of gave me a bigger, wider spectrum understanding of what objectives I really needed to be hitting and focusing on. And I made sure that I didn't apply security to the infrastructure after it's in place. Rather, on upcoming projects and different changes that were coming down the pipe, I started to integrate security with those changes and make sure that I was prioritizing it as a key point within that process. So really what that does when you apply it to your infrastructure as a whole and the teams that support, defend, or develop on it is that you make more of the right choices. For those of you that haven't seen the 20 critical security controls, this is the website. You can check them out. They're really awesome. So thinking about that, really, we need to look at how we actually achieve that. It's all well and good to say it. So going back to StarCraft 2, I thought, man, I have no idea what any of this stuff does. I can't use any of it effectively or defend it effectively if I don't really dig deeper. And really, if we compare that to how we approach our security programs, what that means is we need to have a good understanding of what our resources are doing and what normal looks like. Now, a lot of sysadmins, a lot of folks that work in various departments and different IT functions will say, bro, I know I've got these servers. I know they do these things. They have these roles installed. And I can tell you, I've seen so many talented, really bright technical folks fall into that way of thinking without actually having data points to back it up. They might be able to pull a report here or there. They might have a management platform that gives some high-level stuff, but they don't really have a way that they can compare it on an ongoing basis. So that led me to want to collect all the things so that I knew what was going on and I could actually examine those data points and know when there was a change. So going back to StarCraft 2, and this is where the analogy breaks down a little bit, so bear with me. But we're going to send unit commands. I mean, what do you do when you don't know what something does? You play with it, you look at it, you mess around with it, you read the documentation. And one good place to start is to get that understanding of what's going on in areas that you have no vision. So that was a scan in StarCraft 2 that happened. So the way we do that, like on a Windows host, for example, using netstat with these flags, NAO, it's really a great way to examine what's happening from a networking standpoint on that system because it gives you all the listening ports and active connections on that machine at the same time. So then we go into using siege tanks. Siege tanks don't really compare to Procmon, but whatever. Anyway, so Procmon is a great way to pair, or a great tool to pair with netstat, especially with the flags that I showed you earlier, because what you get that's a key point is the process ID, the PID, which you can't see really clearly here, but basically Procmon allows you to examine what that process is doing, both at a registry level, file level, etc. And in case you missed it, the joke from earlier was that I crappily photoshopped my face onto a siege tank pilot. But they're not all winners, so don't get mad. So really, command groups, when I was thinking about how do I now take these units that I'm starting to understand and do something with them, I didn't want to go and send each unit one by one at things. So I started to group them into command groups, and that, for this purpose, roughly translates to scripting, although it really doesn't. Anyway, whatever. The basic script is this for netstat, anyway. You can automate using the flags I show here, which are NAOB. That's going to give you the network information. It's going to give you the process ID, but it's also going to give you the, in addition to the listening ports, all of the executables and DLLs associated with those executables, so that you can actually take that static output on your hosts. And ideally, you would do this all in an automated fashion. These are all basic Windows commands, for those of you that don't know. But you take that output and you can compare it and look for those changes. So really, command groups don't equal scripting, but again, they're not all winners. So rally points, I don't know. The StarCraft 2 thing's not really working out, so I'm just going to move on to talking about user accounts. Really understanding, again, using very basic Windows commands, what users and group memberships exist for those users, specifically the administrator group, will on an ongoing basis help you understand what changes have happened, but two, if those changes have happened, what those users are doing. NetView localhost is a good way to get an understanding of the shares that are going on your system. It's also good to understand the startup items that you've got, and then the scheduled tasks as well. So again, the purpose of all of that, no one expects you to run all those things individually. Running all those things individually and manually is not really going to do you much good. But if you take all of that output, you script it, and then you just diff the results, say every quarter, it's going to give you an understanding of what changes, if you don't have any other monitoring solution, what changes have happened on those systems so that you can know when something is amiss. Now, in the world of Linux, there's similarities, but there's a few different things. There are different approaches. So we still use netstat. The flags are a little bit different, but it gives us a little bit better output. So here, really, what we're going to look at is listening ports, open connections, and what those are doing. LSOF is a great command to get an understanding of running processes. You can also use it to examine a few other things that I'll talk about in a minute. ps-aux is going to give you a list of those running processes and the timing information and a few other pieces of information around it, specifically the PID. And then we also want to be looking at the user accounts. We want to be looking at, the UID level of those user accounts in Linux. If you see new unexpected accounts with a UID higher than 500, that's something to take a look at. Same thing with unexpected UID 0 accounts. I've got if anyone's interested after, I've got the syntax for grepping that. But specifically what you want to do once you've gathered that information, you've gone through, you've collected that same profile that you've got in your Windows environment, you want to look at those processes that are out of place, again using LSOF, but using the P flag and then following that with the process ID. That's going to actually give you can't read it too clearly here, but a greater breakdown of what's happening with that process, what files it's accessing, what devices it's using, really everything that's going on with it. So let's get dangerous. We're not going to talk too much more about the hosts. Again, the point that I would leave you with on those is that you really that's a good way to get a baseline of what behavior is normal on your hosts and understand exactly what they're doing. So the next area we're going to talk about is beyond the host level, how we restrict traffic and what traffic we want to restrict in what direction. using the wrong controls in terms of network security can leave you exposed to threats in ways that you can't manage. Taking a look at the picture we've got here, well, you can't see it real clearly, but the flying units, these little guys down here, are owning these command centers, the planetary fortresses, really bad because those planetary fortresses are a control for ground units. They only attack ground. The point there is that if we use the wrong controls, we don't get the results that we need. So one thing that I love to highlight, and something that a lot of people I feel underutilize, is the concept of a data diode. So for folks that don't know or don't remember what a data diode is, it's something that you probably learned through your whatever networking training you've gotten a long, long time ago. It's essentially just the description of a ACL setup that allows unidirectional traffic. So you can get certain requests for information, heartbeats, things that don't need to go two ways in your network, and you restrict those both at a port level, if in the case where you have layer 3 switches, but also at a VLAN level if you don't. And those really can be very powerful in terms of mitigating those threats. I mean, think about how much less risk is involved when you're administrating a network and only pushing out changes or collecting data in a unidirectional manner. You can reach all the resources you need from an administrative perspective, manage them, but an attacker that compromises a segment of that network is not going to be able to actually touch anything outside of that segment if you configure your controls in the right way. The other flip side of that is that you're also going to be able to generate more noise from a logging perspective when folks are there poking around trying to cross those barriers that you've set up. So long story short, basically you place roadblocks of all different types to block that traffic in directions that it shouldn't be going and allow legitimate traffic that fits the signature that you feel should be there to go through as needed. Another networking technique or networking concept that a lot of places don't utilize very well or really at all is the concept of host isolation. For those of you that don't know, host isolation very simply just means that one hosts that are connected to a medium, like a switch, for example, can't talk to other hosts attached to that switch, or in some cases, hosts outside of that, aside from whatever is specifically allowed. Really, again, this gives you the opportunity to subdivide your network, gives you the opportunity to create more data points for yourself so that you know when things are going on and you can monitor for that and react to it. So as a bigger example, if I'm allowing port 3389 and 80 traffic from the billing accounting department, which is that bottom left, to the data center, which is the top left, but I'm not allowing it to the public outreach counseling HR department, which may have HIPAA data, it may have other things that would be valuable to an attacker. I can alert on any packets dropped on the switch between them at the point when they're attempting to traverse that barrier. So that could be disallowed ports, could be VLANs. It depends on how you set it up, but the unifying theory is that by doing that, you get that intelligence before really it's too late to react. Again, for doing this with ports specifically, typically switches, even small business switches, need to have layer 3 switching capabilities. But something to consider when you're doing this is that you don't want to put unnecessary controls in place to block activity that doesn't need to be blocked and monitored. So if we don't put the right controls in place, they'll be as useless as these turrets and bunkers sitting in a field. So where does that leave us? What pace do we begin this at? If we've never done this before, we haven't tried to address these things, how do we begin to roll this out? One place, again, we start with using the SANS 20 to create a program plan. We want to automate those things. If you're in the Windows world, it might be these tools, System Center Configuration Manager. You could use PowerShell. You could use, simple Windows scripting, whatever you're comfortable with. But ultimately, what you want to do is make sure that your approach is giving you the comfort that you need to go and address those challenges and not bite off too much early on. Because data that you gather that you can't do anything with is not going to put you in any better position. On the Linux side, obviously you can use Puppet, you can use Python, you could use any number of different things. I'm not going to list them all. But the basic concept is the same. We want to get those data points. We want to start with things we can manage. Then we expand it out over time so that we end up making more happy faces. We can react to attackers. We can get the data we need. And we can make Mr. Smiley happy. So really what I like to tell people that haven't dove into this too deep or may not have all the technical skills necessary, whether you're a developer or ops engineer or whatever, be kind to yourself and don't put too much stress on trying to do all this out the door. And certainly there's more than this than you can do, but this is a good place to start. So start small. Begin with one measure that you're comfortable with and a distribution method you're comfortable with, and then build on that, each quarter until you get it to where you want to go. Because the idea is that we stop those slip-ups and poor decisions to get the results that we need to closely monitor that state on an ongoing basis and create intelligence for ourselves and our environment. So what are we left with? Really, you want to focus, if you don't have a SIM, you don't have other controls, you don't have other ways to monitor your network, focus on your hosts and your network layer as two great places to both control and monitor your security program and your environment. Roll out controls as you're able to. Build on those controls over time as it's comfortable. And don't feel bad if you don't get everything in the first pass. Really just pace yourself and work on the items that you think will give you the most bang for your buck on a timeline that makes sense to you. And don't put the wrong foot forward. If you are not comfortable in Linux, don't go try to create Puppet instances or other scripts that you can't manage or data that you don't know what to do with. Really focus on things that you can generate those quick wins early with and build on them from there. Because otherwise it'll be a damn shame. So, once again, my name's Steven Legg. This is who I am. These are my stats. And thanks again for listening. Did anybody have any questions? All right. Thank you much.